Hey everyone, Tony D with the Webcomic Factory Focus, taking a look at a comic I do called Digital Hobo. Digital Hobo, the premise is it's about Dylan, and he is a freelance writer like myself, and he is trying to get by in the world of freelancing, uh, you know, just doing odd jobs. So, Digital Hobo, the original concept was I originally was going to call it Craigslist Hobo, but I decided that would be a problem with the name, so I changed it to Digital Hobo. And so it's just about a lot of it's based on my own work and doing odd jobs off of Craigslist, which sometimes I get, sometimes crazy things happen. It started with an artist named Naki Man, and this is his artwork here. And as you can see, it's pretty awesome. He really started us off well, I thought, and a lot of people really dug his stuff. His like a few of the artists I work with, his second language was English, and we had a little problem communicating at first, and he only ended up doing about 6 strips before he really just dropped off the face of the earth. I tried to email him. He never responded, and that was kind of it. And then, so for a while, we didn't have um, any digital hobo on the site. And then Eddie Jensen started doing it, and he had a different style, a very cartoony, but I liked it. It was so clean and nice. I believe Eddie was from one of the Nordic countries. I want to say Sweden. I don't remember. But his bio's on the site if you want to check it out. And he had a really great style. It was interesting. And it was interesting to watch this comic evolve over time because it was sort of the same concept, but different artists kept popping in. This one, Jim Lovell, who started doing it, he had a little bit of a cartoony thing, but also kind of like a more of a pastel sort of look to the whole deal. This was about a client, an online client who he went a little cuckoo, and this was about 2012. So by 2012, in 2 years, 3 artists. So, but that was fine. That was fine. That's part of the charm, I think, of doing webcomics in this way, because it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you could just stop and start these things. And really, this is a pretty strip based. Sometimes it gets to a comic book type page. This here is Guillermo Martinville, really, real. I can't say it. But he went for a sort of a black and white with gray tones look, and he also had a bit of an anime kind of influence, I think. And but Dylan, all through the changes, kept his look, with the glasses and the sort of dark hair. He was only around for 5 strips, but I believe he worked on one of the other comics. I want to say, I think he worked on the comic about bowling. But then we had an artist by the name of Sleight, a very artistic name, and he was on for 16 strips. And as you could see, he was a really interesting style here, very almost close to photorealistic, but not quite. Um, and this was a great strip here. This was one of my favorites. This was based on a guy I actually worked for, and he he was like, I think he owed people a lot of money, and he was a little bit nuts. And the secretary did exactly what this secretary did in this thing. The guy went to lunch, and the secretary leaned over to me and said, "Whatever you do, don't take a job here." And I said, "What? Huh? What?" And then he walked back in the room, and she never continued the conversation again. It was crazy. It was crazy. So a lot of these are based on real clients or real jobs I had. But Slight was on for 16 strips, so he did a pretty good run. And then Mary S. George took over, and her style was also pretty cartoony, but she had a lot of color and life to it that was a little bit different than some of your traditional sort of comic guys. A little more animated, if I can, if that's correct. This was I like this strip too. This was based on a client I had who he well, he wasn't a client, but my client wanted me to work with him, and he was brought in as a consultant on this project, and he initially said, "Oh, there's no egos, it's fine, just give me all your criticism." Now, I'm not really tactful at giving criticism, but I kind of knew my place in this situation. I wasn't particularly mean or hurtful. I just said, "Well, he pitched this long idea, which clearly we didn't have the budget for. It wasn't going to work, and it really didn't fit in what I thought was the project." And the guy just blew up at me like the moment I said anything, and it was very mild criticism. It was something like, "Well, maybe we could consider something slightly different," something incredibly mild like that. And the guy just went off, and he was just screaming at me that I didn't know how to work with him, and all I was doing was insulting him. And so this guy, Mary, really captured that moment. It's so funny because he was an older guy. So Mary was around for 60 strips. Really fleshed out a lot of it, and that was, geez, I think that was more. Yeah, that was more than all the other previous artists combined. And then Nathaniel Regan got on board for 29 strips, and his was kind of back to a little more traditional comic, but also has a lot of energy to it. And Dylan, I think he's really maintained a pretty consistent look throughout. And this is his therapist, Dr. Langdon. I had at the time started to see a therapist after my divorce, so I threw him into the mix, and that was fun too, because I could talk to my therapist about my work and how that was going and what she thought of it. My actual therapist was a woman, but I changed it because I didn't want to. And I didn't really use anything she said or I said. Really, it was all about it's all about freelancing, not about me. And then our current artist is Varun Pathak, and as you can see, we're kind of back to a more traditional Dylan, if you will. And I really got to update the character bio a bit, because there's been a bunch of characters added, but it's so hard because we've had so many different artists, and I never know when they're just going to leave. And like Eddie's, I used Eddie's art for the current bio, and I feel like I need to update it, but then like me, Dylan broke up with his. In this case, Dylan had a fiance. He hadn't gotten married in the comic, and so I had him go through the same thing I was going through. Right, so his fiance left, and he was going through a rough time, and so we put some of that in the comic. So Ren's not really in it anymore, and so there's no current Ren. I actually put her in. I think I put her in one strip at post breakup, but it was just to sort of do things with Dylan, really, because it's all about Dylan and his various odd jobs and trying to survive. So it's just interesting how the comic has evolved despite all the different art teams. On a paper comic, a lot of times when you change art teams, people get very upset and they quit and they won't buy your comic. This is Carol, who was added later on. Carol's not. Is Carol based on anybody? Sort of. She's sort of a combo of a couple of different. She's sort of a combination of a girl I dated for a very short time, literally like 2 or 3 dates, who tried to talk me into working on a business venture, and a client I had who I didn't date, but who was kind of ruthless in the way she sort of sold her products and got things. So Carol's kind of a combo of those two people mixed in with some other elements, and just I'm just having fun with the character because she reminds me also too a little bit of Lindsay Naegle from The Simpsons. And as you may or may not know, I worked on The Simpsons comics for many years, so If I had to classify her as close to a Simpsons character, it would probably be she's like a younger version of Lindsay Naegle. And then this guy Spencer, he was based on a guy I met who was an actual agent who was just struck me as one of the biggest sleazy guys I ever met in my life, and I only knew him for a short time, and so he's a perfect sort of character for this. Not that all agents are sleazy. I've worked with a few agents who are perfectly fine, but they're not. They are what they are. They can't make money unless you make money, and so when they use you, and when they can't, they don't have any reason to call you. So he's a fun character too. But that's Digital Hobo. That appears on, what are we on now? I think Mondays. Yeah. So tomorrow should be a new strip, and featuring the work of Varun and myself. So if you're a freelancer, a screenwriter, or just someone who doesn't work very steadily, I think you will enjoy Digital Hobo. Thank you for tuning in. Check out my books on Amazon.com, including Wokistan, a novel, and the Pineys, books 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ebook, trade paperback, Kindle Unlimited is free. And we will see you next time.